I think all of us want to feel special, different, that we're making a big difference, not just another of the 7.8 billion people on the planet. And so I, like many people, like to come up with big ideas. And today's episode of How to Do Life, I'm going to deviate from my usual practice of talking about what's immediately practical to you and focus more on my best big ideas, both because it's hopefully fun for me, but also maybe even helpful to share these big picture ideas in case one or more of you want to take on one of these big goals, but also to trigger any big ideas that you might have that have nothing to do with what I'm suggesting, but these are merely to get you in that mode of thinking if that's what you want to do. So I'm going to give you a little headline, kind of a billboard of what's coming up. I'm going to offer first my core area of expertise, career stuff. I'm going to offer some big ideas regarding the world of career, the world of work. Then my secondary area of expertise, education. I'm going to talk about some ideas for reinventing education. And then finally, a miscellaneous collection of everything from reinventing healthcare to what to do about the Israeli-Palestinian problem to how we elect our leaders. So, okay, let's start right now with career stuff. Maybe the thing I'm most qualified to propose an alternative is regarding career counseling. I've been a career counselor for over 30 years, and I've had over almost 6,000 clients. And I think the field absolutely desperately needs reinvention. The field is noted for telling people to do what you love, dream big and you can do it, do what you love and the money will follow, all that stuff. And I think the empirical reality is that for most people, especially the not super genius, super driven, super connected people who tend to come to career counseling, that becomes a dream because most people's dream jobs fall into one of a few highly competitive categories, whether the dream is to be in the entertainment business or in politics or in sports or, being an investment banker and making zillions of dollars, being an environmentalist. I mean, almost most people's dream jobs fall into those small categories, and they're so damn competitive that unless you are a superstar who also is well connected and or some luck, it's going to be tough. So I think that the reality is that most career counselors should focus on 2 or 3 core, more realistic and more likely to be helpful areas. First is, if somebody is looking to find a career, focus on you don't have to say be open to anything, but simply have them identify the 1 or 2 of their core natural strengths which they enjoy using. And they would be whether it be you're a word person or you're a people person or you're a researcher type or you're social or you're artistic or you're more of an office detail type. Simply starting by identifying those 6 things and any other career non-negotiables. You want to work at home, you want to work in the San Francisco Bay Area, you want to work mainly solo, you mainly want to work mainly in teams, you mainly want to work for-profit, non-profit, just those few things is where you start, and then come up with what is the most realistic goal that meets those general requirements. And that could often be simply tapping what your parents do, or using your parents' connections, because they're going to give you inside connections that nobody else would, or your romantic partner or whatever. And then, of course, yes, the second area is, yes, career counselors can be helpful in helping people land the job. But I really urge, I urge being ethical. Too often career counselors cross the line and don't just give advice on how to create a resume or cover letter. They actually write or just very heavily edit it. And so therefore the employer is not seeing the real person, but who the career counselor is, and that really unfairly disadvantages applicants who reveal their true selves by writing themselves. And also there's too often career counselors will try to cover up weaknesses, which is cosmically unjust. It makes the world worse because the more qualified person who didn't get that hired gun to be the career counselor is at a disadvantage when in fact he or she would be more meritorious. And then the third component of being a career counselor in the reinvented one would be a much larger proportion of the time than is currently spent on helping the person make the most of the job. That is onboarding, communication skills, office politics, public speaking, keeping ongoing learning, being the coach of those on-the-job skills may be the most valuable thing that career counselors do. And that is very different from what career counselors typically do, which is they give the Myers-Briggs and the Strong, and they have you come up with your dream job, and then, help you try to land it, and then they're done. I think I'm proposing a reinvention that would make the world a better place and actually more often serve clients. So that's my first big idea. I'm liking to call this segment, What's the Big Idea? Anyway, pun. Next, in terms of, now flipping the other side, employee selection. It is absurd that interviewing in general is done so poorly by merely asking stock questions like, tell me about yourself, what's your greatest strength, what's your greatest weakness, what's a problem you've faced in the past that you've triumphed over, where's your failure you've had. Those are so coachable. So you end up selecting the candidate who is the most prepared interviewee rather than the most likely to do a good job. So the single most important key to reinventing employee selection is to replace all that crap with simulations of common difficult tasks that are required on that job. That is the most predictive of what the person is going to be like on the job, and clearly it is job related, so it is relatively immune from accusations of racism, sexism, etc. That's most important. Second, another key part is, as this is something that the best firms in the country do already, like Amazon and Google, they do almost all their hiring from referral, because unfortunately there have been studies that show that a majority of job seekers are not fully honest on their applications, on their resumes. So it's impossible then to tell for an employer to tell what the person is like. But if the employer relies mainly on referrals from people who are trusted colleagues or friends, there's more likely that you're going to be getting an applicant from somebody who's been pre-screened as competent and more likely, and be a validly legitimate candidate that's worth consideration. Right? And the third thing that I like to do is, as an employer, is when it comes time for the reference check, to ask the finalist candidate, the one who you're about to hire, for a half dozen references, including their email addresses, and then email them all and explain that you're hiring for an important position. This is what's required in the position. If you think this candidate, I'm considering Mary Jones for the job. If you think Mary would be excellent on that, I welcome your emailing me or phoning me. If not, no need to respond. That avoids the problem of people are very reluctant to give negative references. But if you query 6 that way, and you don't get at least 4 positive responses, and of course positive ones, you probably are wise to move on to your number 2 candidate. So that's how I would reinvent employee selection. Now, I also want now to talk about a third, and this is a more macro issue, which we need to create jobs, obviously more jobs. And how do you create more jobs? Well, if you just, print money and create more government jobs, that's eating the seed corn. That is taxing the people most likely to create more jobs. So the real ultimate long-term way to create more good and ethical jobs is to have a kindergarten through graduate school, or certainly through college, curriculum in ethical entrepreneurship, starting with the proverbial lemonade stand when the kids are in the classes in first grade or kindergarten, all the way up to much more sophisticated businesses, but teaching the art of entrepreneurship, which is the art of identifying problems, the ability to develop practical solutions, the how to keep your costs under control and raise money if you need to, and how to retain your ethics, how to market well, and how to retain your ethics in the face of much temptation. I think that K-12 curriculum teaching ethical entrepreneurship, especially the skill of learning to find unmet needs, is a really good way to create good jobs over the long run. I also believe in a couple of other options, one I call the assistance army. There are so many people who need assistance domestically around the home. Homework helpers, newborn helpers, homework helpers for their kids, tech helpers for for teaching, adults. Some adults are not very tech savvy and could use a coach, to elder help, helping you, or if you're older, or your elder parent, to get their needs met. No, I am well aware that that's not going to pay a whole lot of money, but having an like a public service announcement, like they always talk about the New Deal or the WPA, if there was a major national move to have an assistance army, I think many people who would otherwise not even thinking of hiring would hire, and there'd be many more people getting these fully ethical, helpful jobs. Now, I'm well aware that they're unlikely to pay well enough to make a full living, but 2 or 3 of those assistance kind of jobs together might make a wonderfully varied patchwork portfolio career in life. No, you're not going to live on high on the hog, but I don't think that a materialistic lifestyle is worth going after anyway. But for many people who might otherwise find it difficult to get a good job, the assistance army might be a great source of them. Now, I want to turn to a more really radical idea that we've already started to see amid COVID, and that is the elimination or virtual decimation. Decimation means reducing by 90%, literally. Reducing by 90% the size of corporate headquarters. Most people are actually happier working at home, especially under normal circumstances when traffic is terrible getting to the workplace, and the distractions of the workplace, and the craziness of the cube farm, in which you can't hear yourself think. And working at home allows you childcare. It makes it easier to deal with some childcare issues, to be able to have the freedom to take breaks when you want. You can still be very social if you want by having virtual water cooler, virtual break rooms where you connect with people either in groups or individually, and that way you get to choose who you want to chat with. I think that the corporate headquarters are going to be reduced to a small number of meeting rooms, because even, there are some times when you want face-to-face, where even the best Zoom meetings or whatever aren't quite enough. So there's a need for a small headquarters for some key employees, perhaps, and for some important meetings that are in person. But I think those will be shrunk enormously, saving company huge amounts of money, thereby benefiting the shareholders, the people like you and me who are investing in a stock or a mutual fund, and at the same time, enabling people to have a much more relaxing work existence. They don't need to if they don't want to dress up every morning. And they can work with more flexible hours. If they choose to take 2 hours at home to do in the middle of the day to do something fun, they can do that. They can make it up in the evening as long as the productivity is there. And that's really important for employers to remember, that it's not seat time that counts, it's results where possible that counts. Now, any of these quick and dirty ideas is going to have many exceptions, but the devil is in the detail, but the perfect is the enemy of the good. So I think the idea of corporations dramatically shrinking their headquarters would benefit everybody. And the final thing I want to say related to career is only tangentially related to career, and that is taxation. It is absurd that we have a system in this country of income taxes where hundreds of million, over 100 million Americans every year must devote significant time to keeping their records for taxes, preparing all their deductions and whatever for the accountant, or doing it themselves, or paying an accountant. And then, of course, the rich are better able to take advantage of the myriad complicated tax laws. That seems nuts to me. It seems to me that we'd be wiser to forego the income tax, both federal and state and local. In many places like New York City, there's a city income tax as well, and replace it with a value-added tax, which is a tax on consumption. So we do that already with gasoline, but I mean, every product should, like in Europe, have what's called a VAT, and it should be it should add X percent to the cost of the item. So it would be revenue neutral relative to income tax, no greater net total tax versus income, no less. And certain basic items would be exempt, which would ensure the progressivity, and luxury items would have a higher VAT tax. And that would save an enormous amount of time and stress in income tax preparation, and there would be much less tax cheating. There was a testimony before Congress some years ago that hundreds of billions of dollars are lost because of cheating. And in addition, the side benefit, if you're taxing consumption, it's good for the environment, because it's going to be it's a disincentive to buy stuff if it's going to cost more, and an incentive to save. So the final, even vaguely career-related idea that I wanted to share with you is reinventing of taxation, replacing income taxes with a VAT tax. When I come back, I'm going to talk about some ideas for reinventing education, which I'm actually even more excited about. And then I'm going to talk about a few miscellaneous ones, reinventing healthcare, dealing with the Palestinian-Israeli crisis, and how we select our leaders. Stay with me. I do thank you for staying with me. As promised, having now offered my big ideas regarding career and the workplace, I now want to offer some regarding education. Curriculum desperately needs reinvention. The notion that we force every kid to graduate high school having learned quadratic equations, simultaneous equations, stochastic processes in chemistry, and the arcana of history like the War of 1812, while we allow them to graduate without practical skills in conflict resolution, financial literacy, and real-world ethics, and real-world sex education and relationship education, to me is elitist and a travesty. I really think we should teach what is required for successful life first, and then leave that most of academia for college, at the college level, where somebody who is interested in it for personal reasons or for career can indeed take those courses in college. There's only so much time in the day, in the school day, and we have to make choices. And to me, the choice we should be making is, let's prepare people for how to do life first. The things that they can survive without knowing about the War of the Roses. They cannot survive without learning about conflict resolution or financial management or critical thinking and critical reasoning. And those who argue that you learn critical thinking and critical reasoning best by learning to derive geometric formulas, I think are really reaching. In the same way as they used to say that Latin taught that. I think you teach critical thinking by taking the critical incidents that people face in their life, how to interpret the news of the day, how to deal with somebody who disagrees with you in an argument, how do you deal with somebody who's trying to sell you something. That's how you can learn critical thinking in a far more practical and relevant way than learning to derive geometric theorems. The second thing I would do is I would have classes taught by what I call ultra classes. Think back to, for example, the typically most challenging courses for many high school students, entering high school students, is algebra. And it's a perfect bad storm. You've got a course that's difficult for many people, taught by a pool of people who, by definition, are not as verbal. People who choose to go into math are generally not as verbal as in other fields. And you've got it, and it's a critical gateway course and I don't think it should be, but it currently is. It's currently a real prerequisite for almost any college, for any high school graduation and admission to college. So you've got a perfect storm for wanting to reinvent it. So now imagine you had two classes. You could choose from two different sections of an intro to algebra course. One is a traditional one where you get whoever randomly assigned to some algebra teacher. Or two, imagine there was a course you could take online in which it was a dream team of transformational, beloved algebra teachers, each teaching their favorite part of the course. And then there's a live teacher, a paraprofessional live in the classroom to help answer your questions and maintain classroom discipline. I dare say that most people, even most educators, if they were having to take algebra, would choose that second option. And that would enable people who are, whether you're rich or poor, from Abyssinia to Zululand, to get world-class instruction. If there's anything that holds promise for closing the achievement gap, in my judgment, it is that. And that could also be applied, of course, at the college level, where at the college level, because they're more adult, they may not even need to visit classes. They can do it at home using fingerprint sign-in and take their classes. Of course, there's a need for extracurricular activities, so those could be done on a scaled-back size campus. No need for so many shrubs and fancy dorms either, which tend to often be a very expensive hothouse for not great behaviors. I'm well aware of the advantage of residence halls, and apparently the data shows that people who live in residence halls do better, but that there's so many causation problems. People who can afford to live in the dorms tend to have fewer problems in the real world, so they're going to do better anyway. But certainly you would save huge amounts of campus space by eliminating dorms, eliminating a lot of classrooms because people could take their ultra classes at home, and also having extracurriculars using community facilities, community parks, community pools, community gyms. That would dramatically reduce the size of campuses and improve the be able to dramatically lower the absurd cost. I mean, it used to be in the old days when very few people went to college that a college degree was a virtual guarantor of good employment. But now with such a high percentage, 70% of all high school kids go to college, a college degree is a yawner for most employers, especially when the data is showing that there's relatively little freshman to senior growth in those critical areas of reading and critical thinking. So the idea of cost control of college is absolutely critical. One more thing that's even more radical reinvention is, right now what makes people go to college and stick through it is they want that piece of paper. And right now the colleges are in charge of dispensing that piece of paper. I would rather see people collect their courses from any of a variety of different universities, and then let the federal government, and I'm not some big government guy, Norman, but I think this is something the federal government would do well. The government could be an aggregator of all those courses and maybe even real life experience, and would certify when somebody met all the requirements for a bachelor's degree. And if they did that, that would also mean a bachelor's degree is more standard. That would mean a bachelor's degree means a bachelor's degree. Grade inflation would be perhaps less prevalent, and there'd be less variation from school to school in terms of what a bachelor's degree means. So that's what I think about reinventing college. Now I want to talk about career education: law school, medical school, architecture, MBA, that is future leaders, managers. It's unfortunate that especially just as in prestigious undergraduate universities, many of the classes, if not most, are taught by people who are longer on research skills than on practical experience. And that's especially discouraging when I think about medical school, where life and death is at place, but even law school and architecture school, etc. The scholars who are expert at research may not be the best teachers, and their expertise really tends to be in a very narrow area. If they're a researcher, they can't know everything about everything. They tend to be hell-bent on knowing everything about their narrow area. And so when it comes time for them to teach students who need a broader education, they're less good, and they're less practical. They may know all the facts, but the master practitioner is all about nuance, the subjectivity in making judgments in those narrow situations. In the medical school example, you can give all the blood tests you want, but there are subjective things in the way a person talks, breathes, the way in which their gait, walks, talks, breathes, and skin tone, a million things that are subtle, and in the way in which they present their story, their contributing story. That's something that only a master practitioner can have, and that can mean life or death. So I would be replacing most of the teaching that goes on at these professional schools, law school, medical school, MBA, architecture, etc. Replace the academics with master practitioners who have the ability not only to know all that nuance, but the ability to motivate and convey all of that expertise. Now, finally, as promised, I want to turn, we've now talked about my big ideas in regard to career and in regard to education, and last I have some miscellaneous ideas I want to share. Healthcare. Everybody's talking about reinventing healthcare, and it certainly makes sense to me that you take the insurance company middleman out of it. They are an expensive entity, and I've heard too many horror stories about how insurance companies will deny, delay until the patient's too sick or dies. No good. We have the wrong incentive there. I think that's something that the federal government probably does need to be in charge of, because they're not profit centered. That said, that's the liberal side of me, on the meritocracy side of me. I believe that every human being, by virtue of being a human, is entitled to a basic level of health care, but it doesn't mean that everybody should. So people who don't pay into the system, and there are a lot of them, and there'll be a lot more if we try to cover everyone, they get a basic level of health care. They're going to see physician assistants, not doctors. They're going to see a physical therapy assistant, not a physical therapist. They're going to get treatments that are cost effective, that aren't so expensive. So somebody who's got stage 4 cancer, they're probably not going to get more surgery or expensive treatments. They're going to get palliative care to keep them comfortable. But if they're in a hospital, they're going to be in a ward. They're not going to be in a semi-private room. If you're paying into the system, you get greater choice. You get choice of your practitioner. You not only do you get to see a doctor rather than a physician assistant, but you have your choice of doctor, as President Obama had emptily promised. You get to have a semi-private room if you want. You get the full range of choices of procedures Your wait times may be less for elective procedures. Obviously, in an emergency, there should be no distinction. Everybody should have access in an emergency. But I think that creating those two tiers of healthcare would allow everybody to be covered at lower cost and result in some sense of merit where people who have worked hard and paid into the system will get a higher level of care. So that's my idea for reinventing healthcare. The Israeli-Palestinian dispute has gone on for decades, maybe millennia, some would say, in one form or another. And I think we have to realize that a 3,000-year-old enmity is not going to be solved with some nice shuttle diplomacy. I think it is time to realize, just like in some marriages they need to divorce, I think Israel and the Palestinians need to divorce. And since the Palestinians aren't moving and their demographics, their population, their birth rates that are much higher than the Jews and the Israelis, I suggest we create a new Israel. I'm well aware in New York, which would be just north of New York City, where there's incredible amounts of empty forest land, and yet it's near one of the maybe the largest population of Jews outside of Israel in the world. And I think that, of course, there are going to be some old Jews who say, but this is our biblical homeland or whatever, but there is no perfect answer. To me, it's a relatively good answer. The Jews, if there was a new Israel just above New York City, there isn't going to be somebody who's sworn, Hamas is sworn by charter to try to destroy Israel. And Israel is spending a fortune on defense and perhaps overreacting and building settlements in lands that's disputed. This way, if America spends a fortune in aid to Israel, instead of doing that, spend whatever it takes to facilitate Israelis who want to, no forcing, who want to leave what would then be a Palestinian-controlled Palestine. If they want to immigrate to New Israel in America, there would be some financial support and logistical support to make that happen. And I think that in the end, there'd be far less bloodshed, far less misery on all sides, and the Jews can maybe finally live in peace after 3,000 years of oppression, from the destruction of the Jewish temples by the Romans to the Inquisition, where tens of thousands of Jews were burned at the stake, to the pogroms where millions of Russian Jews were arrested from their homes, to, of course, the Holocaust, 6 million, and now where they say that in Europe 85% of Jews feel unsafe. So I think a new Israel would be very important. I have only a little time left. I want to just talk briefly about elections. It is a testimony to how bad our system of selecting our leaders, that our two candidates are both let's just say deeply flawed, both Trump and Biden. I think we should have limit campaigns to 2 weeks, publicly funded, which would make better candidates be willing to run, instead of the current system where you got to press the flesh for 4 years and say one thing to Group A and another thing to Group B. You'd get far better candidates to run. You would have one televised debate. You would have a neutral body like Consumers Union list their track record and their previous voting, as well as their stance on key issues of the day. I think you would get far better people running and a more informed electorate, and less of that manipulation that all the spinmeisters do and the marketing people that both parties use. So I think that would be the best solution for reinventing education. In any event, as always, I like to end the show. I do invite you to think about what you would like to, what your best big idea is. Whether you want to take one of mine and run with it, fantastic. If you've got your own and want to run with it, so much the better. If it's simply good dinner time conversation that's more productive than the usual, that's great. In any event, this is Marty Nemko reminding you that we find comfort among those who agree with us, growth among those who don't.